You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. The Trump administration is trying to restrict access to a substance you might find at your local smoke shop. The FDA in late July announced a plan to crack down on 7-OH. Commissioner Marty Makary described it as an opioid that can be more potent than morphine. The agency is pushing to get it classified as a Schedule I substance like ecstasy or heroin. You may not have heard of 7-OH, but you've probably heard of kratom. It's the substance that 7-OH comes from, and it's controversial in its own right. Some states have banned kratom. The federal government tried to classify it as a Schedule I substance in 2016, but opted not to after getting a wave of pushback. This year, Washington state regulators withdrew a proposal to designate kratom as a Schedule I substance, saying that it didn't meet the criteria. So for now, you can buy kratom products in the state. And we want to know more about both of these substances, so we called up Caleb Banta-Green. He's a research professor in the School of Medicine at the University of Washington. Hey, Professor, thanks for being back on KUOW, and welcome to Soundside.
Thank you for having me.
So we reached out to you because you published a report on kratom last year. And to start us off, why did you want to look into kratom, and what were some of the basics that you were interested in that you discovered?
Well, honestly, I work in the university district and walk to work and was just I've been seeing these kratom signs everywhere. And of course, I'd seen them all over the state. I'd seen them out when I was at the coast and all over the place. And I'm a drug epidemiologist, among other things. And I wasn't really seeing much about it in my data. And yet, clearly, with that amount of advertising for over a decade, there's a lot of people using it. So we wanted to dig into understanding more. What is this substance and what are the impacts of it?
And what are the basics for kratom? What should people know about what this stuff is? Because as you say, it seems to have increased in popularity just anecdotally from seeing smoke shops advertise it kind of rapidly.
Yeah. So kratom is a plant from Southeast Asia and, around Thailand. And it, like most plants, has dozens of chemically active compounds in it. And a couple of those psychoactive compounds are something called metragonine and the 7-hydroxymetragonine, or 7-OH. And in the plant product, the natural plant product, you're mostly getting the effects of metragonine. And interestingly, like many other plants that are also drugs that we can think of, basically all of them, the plant form is often a lower potency product. It can energize people. It can also provide sedation. What we know specifically, though, about this compound 7-OH, the 7-hydroxymetragonine, is it's a minor component in the plant. But these new products that are getting sold are basically just 7-OH. It's being concentrated. So it's no longer this plant product. It's really this processed thing. Just like if you think about cocaine versus the coca leaf, or cannabis wax versus cannabis plant. It's just all the same story happening in our society. So with the 7-OH, what's important, though, and I'm learning more about this more recently as well, is it appears to bind to opioid receptors in the body. And if you think about opioids, we have opioids that we have heroin, which is a Schedule I drug. We have pharmaceutical fentanyl, which is a Schedule II drug. And so we'll come back to that later, but the scheduling really matters. I think the important thing to understand is that kratom is a plant. It has metragonine and this 7-OH in it, but there are these more recent concentrates that are really just 7-OH, and it's quite potent, and it can lead to respiratory depression, breathing slowing down, essentially an overdose. And because it's more concentrated, it can also lead to addiction even more quickly, probably, than we would see with just the kratom plant itself.
Are there parallels in your mind to, when we saw the influx of fentanyl into the streets and, prior people who had been using opioids suddenly had this much more potent compound and it became more dangerous? Is that a fair comparison?
There's some interesting parallels happening for sure, in that you have this opioid product that people are using that is maybe of moderate potency. And honestly, in an effort to probably make money, I've learned that the reason for why, when it comes to drugs so far in my 30 years, has always been to make money. And that is that a more concentrated product is going to cause a more rapid and greater high. And that will be rewarding to people and they want to use it more often. That also generally relates to higher addiction potential. And it also generally relates to higher overdose risk. And so that is a parallel. The one difference I think we're seeing, I'm getting some signs in the data I'm looking at and the conversations I'm having with healthcare providers, is there may be a bit of a audience split. And that is that kratom is a bit more expensive and packaged in a shiny product with a label and sold in a store. And so there are some, probably, I'm guessing, some overlaps in those markets, but they may be a little bit distinct, where kratom is essentially a slightly more expensive branded product that may have the illusion of being safer because it literally has a label on it.
Is there any benefit that you've observed or heard from your sources when it comes to somebody trying to get off of fentanyl, get off of an opioid, and instead turning to kratom? Is there a potential upside to the kratom being available?
In theory, a person taking a very potent opioid of unknown concentration, like fentanyl, being able to take a lower potency, longer acting known product is safer. And that definitely is the case with these very effective treatment medications we have, buprenorphine and methadone. On paper, yes, a person taking a high concentrate fentanyl product at extreme overdose risk, it would in theory be safer if they were taking a kratom product of lower potency that lasted longer. But we don't know that that's the case because you don't really know what the concentration is in this kratom. And the 7-hydroxy, the 7-OH, also is an overdose risk as well. And we are seeing people also have overdoses on them. I've heard talk with several clinicians who have had people who are on fentanyl who switched to kratom to essentially self-treat and then became dependent on kratom and eventually still went and sought treatment and got effective treatment with treatment medications. So that's really important to know, is that kratom and 7-OH both can be managed. The use disorder, the use being out of control and harmful, can be managed well with our treatment medications.
We talked about the federal government considering the regulation of kratom back in 2016. They backed off of that. The state also has looked at this, hasn't regulated kratom in the way that maybe some people were pushing for. Why do you think now there's this new push to regulate 7-OH? And is that going to make a big difference if there is a Schedule 1 designation for 7-OH?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that. So there clearly is more 7-OH out there, and we're definitely seeing more calls to the poison center for sure. It looks like we're seeing a bit of an uptick in a little bit of treatment admissions. So there's definitely sort of warning signs out there about that. Like, I understand why people are talking more about 7-OH for sure. I think the big issue, putting on my drug policy hat, is what is our reaction going to be? What is our goal? My goal is for people to be healthy and well and have control over their lives. That's my goal. And so thinking about our drug policy from that lens versus the threat lens, I think is really important, because if you come at it from a threat perspective, you get rid of the threat. But that's, people don't use drugs for no reason. They use them for a reason. And we need to understand why they're using them and then address those reasons that they're using them. So for instance, there's a little bit of research out there, a little bit of published research that looks at why people used kratom. And one of the things we see is, yes, they use it for some of the symptoms of pain relief, or maybe trying to get high, or maybe trying to get off of other drugs. But we're also hearing about people who are not able to access treatment medications. And so they're going on kratom. So, but I think the issue is, and I think one of the reasons that we get concerned about scheduling a drug generally, and certainly scheduling it as Schedule 1, is when you make it Schedule 1, it's seen as the most hazardous drug that has no medicinal benefit, and it becomes essentially impossible to study. That's been true with cannabis for decades. The reason we have such poor research on cannabis is because it's been Schedule 1 and you couldn't study it. And given the potential benefits of a botanical product like kratom, all of a sudden you're throwing that out the door. Now, in this instance, they're looking at scheduling 7-OH, not kratom, but there still is a concern. Why are you trying to schedule? So you're trying to get rid of a threat. But what happens when you get rid of a threat is you get rid of the people who pose the threat and you incarcerate them. And you end up criminalizing essentially people using a substance for some array of physical or emotional health reasons. And we've had a very, very bad history of having good outcomes of that over decades. We've generally had very bad outcomes for the folks who are using these substances. So Schedule 1 really, really ties your hands. I think looking at things like Schedule 2 or 3 might be a way to regulate this, but still allow for people to access it in a safe and prescribed way, perhaps, and also to allow further research to happen. So we need to be careful that we are just reacting with the harshest tools that we have, because we think we're going to save people, when we need to recognize the broader context of why people use and how our policies are actually going to impact those folks.
Can you see a world in which kratom is still available, but 7-OH becomes that Schedule 1? Or would it just be, because you can derive 7-OH from kratom, would it be impossible to also have that available in the lower concentration form in smoke shops or wherever?
The short answer is I don't know. I think the broader issue, though, is like, why are folks using these substances? And we have this knee-jerk reaction when there's a threat that we're going to get rid of the threat and schedule it and penalize ultimately the people, right? I think people often think about like, well, we're just scheduling the drug, but drugs don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in the context of human beings and their relationships with other people, and it's going to impact those folks. And is that really the response we want?
You talked about the restrictions on research that a Schedule 1 designation would bring. What are the questions you still have about kratom or 7-OH that you would hope to be able to explore and learn more?
Well, I think that there are a lot of questions around just more broadly around what are effective pain medications. And I think, there's this big desire and there's a lot of work happening around sort of non-addictive pain medications. It doesn't look like kratom would be one of those. It looks like it has addiction potential, and certainly 7-OH has addiction potential. But are there medicinal benefits around pain control that it could have? I have no idea, but we won't know unless we actually study it. Could it be? Could the plant or some derivative of it be helpful as a new type of treatment medication for those folks who develop opioid use disorder? I don't know, and we wouldn't know. So it is interesting. People are using this for a reason. It's been around for a while. There obviously is some value and demand for folks. There's obviously some downsides and negatives there as well. But in some ways, if you make it Schedule 1, you just lock it up and throw away the key, and you lose the opportunity to try to learn more about multiple common health conditions that people have, that while we have some tools, we certainly know we need some better tools. So it's really just sort of losing an opportunity for exploration. And there are safer ways to regulate it that would still have a goal of a health and a public health benefit, that I think we could do with more thoughtful approach to regulation.
Is there anything else that you think people should know who, like you, are kind of walking around maybe the streets of Seattle or other parts of the state and they see the signs for kratom? Anything we haven't discussed that you think people should be aware of when it comes to this substance, kratom and 7-OH, the more concentrated substance?
I think it's important for people to understand they are not inert substances, right? These are drugs that have real physiological impact, that they can cause overdose, that they can cause substance use disorder. So that's true of many things that are out there. So it isn't that folks may not use them at all, but they need to go into that really knowing that they could develop use disorder and they could overdose. Also, very importantly, they need to really protect those products so that kids and animals don't get into them. That's very important. It's important for folks to know that people who do develop use disorder can get effective treatment with treatment medications, and that 7-OH overdoses can be reversed with naloxone. So it's important to understand that just because it's getting sold in a smoke store shop right now over the counter doesn't mean it's a safe or benign product, that it can have hazards. It may have benefits for folks as well, but they just haven't been studied. And we also don't have, because it's not regulated well, there isn't precise labeling or dosing on those products. So it's definitely a buyer beware situation, and really being thoughtful about what's going on and the reasons people are considering using these substances.
Caleb Banta-Green is a research professor in the School of Medicine at the University of Washington. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate your thoughtful exploration of this and your knowledge, just both as from the social work side of things and the epidemiology side of things. Really appreciate the conversation today, Professor. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.